There's something special about those slow weekends, the ones where you have absolutely nothing planned and the chaos of the work week has quieted and your world, at least just for 2 days anyway, feels a little softer and time stretches just enough to savor the simple things. There's a mindfulness to these little bits of magic in life, such as the slow ritual of baking bread, so this video is an appreciation of that slowness. In this video, there's no bells, whistles, or anything fancy. It's just me baking in my old kitchen and enjoying the process along the way. So if you need some slowness in your life, I'd love to take you along with me as I make this rustic bread recipe, savor those slow moments in between, and also try my hand at making a butter candle to accompany the bread. As the chill of winter lessens, there's nothing like diving into the warmth of tradition to celebrate the coming spring. So grab a cozy drink and let's get started. The act of making bread feels so grounding and ancient. It's like a tiny thread that weaves back through millennia. It's connecting and comforting, and immediately through something as simple as mixing dough in an old wooden bowl and slow, intentional kneading hand motions, I'm transported across space and time to the women who came before me. It's a very meditative process, a very deliberate process. Not only the act of baking bread, but making sure the measurements are correct. Baking is a science, so everything has to be down to the last teaspoon. But during this meditative process, I like to think about all the women in my family over generations making and sharing bread. It's also in these moments that I ask myself, what is good about this moment right now? What can your senses tell you, and how can they ground you? Can you hear the birds singing outside? Is the sun shining through your window? Are you sipping on hot tea or coffee? What are their flavors like? What kind of things can you smell? Clean laundry, freshly cut grass, cinnamon or vanilla? What can you feel? A warm breeze, dough between your hands? These thoughts really force you to be present with them. It also brings to mind our history as humans and as a woman. Bread has been at the very center of human history. It is civilization, it's currency, and medicine. In fact, before the discovery of penicillin, poultices made of moldy bread were used to treat minor wounds in ancient Egypt. Bread is, for lack of a more appropriate term, baked into various languages, including the English vernacular with terms like using the word dough as slang for money, breadwinner. Even the word companion comes from the Latin com panis, meaning with bread. So, a companion would be someone you'd share bread with. As a woman, bread is part of our collective narrative. During the early Middle Ages, rotary querns, which were essentially stone hand mills that were used to grind grain, turning it to flour, were operated by women. 2 women would operate the quern because in order to effectively grind the grain, it required an enormous amount of teamwork, cooperation, but also strength. In fact, when researchers analyzed the upper arm bones of women who lived from the Neolithic through the Iron Age, they found that the women of the period, who spent much of their time grinding, had bones that were 5 to 10% stronger than the rowers from the Cambridge University women's rowing team, and those women are insanely strong. But really, the entire process of bread making was a communal effort undertaken by women. As I mentioned, it was women who transformed grain to flour, who made the dough, managed the fire, baked the bread, who gathered by the hearth in their home or ground the grain communally while sharing songs, stories, and advice. Through the entire process, women could be found at the heart of it. back to the actual bread making portion of this video. I allowed the bread to rest overnight in order to rise and spent the morning slowly tidying up and doing chores as I gave it a little time to firm up. But you definitely don't need to wait as long as I did, as the recipe only calls for about 2 to 3 hours minimum of proofing. But I figured in the spirit of the slow weekend, I would do things a little extra slowly. And because bread has been around for millennia, I found a treasure trove of folklore and superstition that is tied to bread that spans across countries and cultures all over the world. I'm very much interested in these topics, so I thought it'd be a perfect opportunity to share some bread-related folklore and superstitions with you. So, it was a long-held belief that you should never sing while you're baking, otherwise you'll sour your bread, and that if you eat your bread crusts, that it would turn your hair curly. Or that the common saying, the upper crust, refers to the superstition that by cutting the top of the loaf before the bottom meant you'd rise in the world. And as you can see here, I am cutting crosses into my loaves, mainly to prevent them from rising badly. But back through antiquity, especially in Yorkshire, England, people would make a cross with their finger, and it was called crossing the witches out. And if you forgot to do this, you'd be at risk for your bread sticking in the oven or otherwise not baking properly. There seems to be a lot of tales associated with bread and British folklore, like this one from Warwickshire that says that whenever it rained on a Holy Thursday, housewives would dash out into the rainstorms with their bottles and pans to collect as much of the rainwater as possible, because over the next year, they would use that water to add to the leavening dough to guarantee a light bake. Bread was also apparently even used in matchmaking and in death rituals. In several places in Britain, a loaf of bread was placed on or passed over a corpse and delivered to a sin eater. This person would consume the bread, which would allow the consumer to take on the sins of the departed, which would in turn free them from roaming the mortal plane for all eternity. So as part of this video, I also wanted to try my hand at making a butter candle. You can tell I'm extremely behind in video editing because back when I filmed this, which I'm ashamed to admit was in 2023, the idea of this butter candle was making its rounds on the internet, and it looked like the perfect, easy project to try out to accompany the bread. It was a fairly simple process. All I did was melt some good quality Irish butter in a pot, then poured the melted butter into small plastic cups as makeshift molds. While the butter was still liquid, I dropped candle wicks into the centers of each one and rolled the excess string around some pens to hold the wicks in place and prevent them from being crooked as the butter solidified. Then it was just a matter of popping the butter candles into the fridge and allowing them to cool and harden before being able to use them. So in the meantime, I took advantage of the wait by making some tea and getting in a bit of reading. Once the butter candles were fully solid, I took them out of the fridge, cut off the plastic cup molds, and they were all set for use. And now, it's finally time to break some bread and enjoy it with my multiple companions, both human and feline. I think we can all agree that for centuries, bread has been more than just food. It's been a source of folklore, a symbol of community, renewal and gathering, of warmth and of life. And as the seasons shift, what better way to welcome spring than with the slow, simple, magical ritual of baking bread?